This video is sponsored by Mack Weldon. What is going on, Solo fam? My name is John Solo, and you may be surprised to hear this, but I have no idea what happens after we die. No idea at all. I wish I did. I wish I could say for certain that our souls left our bodies and became one with the universe, but I'd be lying. That being said, I do have a pretty solid idea of what the ancient Greeks believed happened when your soul was released from its physical husk, and it does not sound fun. Pretty much everyone, including some of the most famous Greek heroes like Odysseus, were cursed to wander the dark, damp, and musty underworld for eternity. If you were related to the gods or got in their good graces somehow, you could be sent to the beautiful fields of Elysium, where you could indulge in whatever pleasures your heart desired, but if you dared insult them in any way, your soul would be damned to Tartarus, and it was there that you'd learn the true definitions of pain, misery, and humiliation, like going to high school forever. Also, just like high school, you can think of Tartarus as the Greco-Roman equivalent of the biblical hell, and in this episode of Mythology Explained, we're going to talk all about it, what people did that caused them to go there, and the horrible ways they were punished for transgressing against the gods. Before we get into it though, I've got to answer the question that I know is on all of your minds. How do I look so good today? I'm happy to say that it's all thanks to this episode's sponsor, Mack Weldon. Okay, corny transition, but if you're a man who wants to look your best, you're gonna want to hear me out because Mack Weldon is reinventing the male shopping experience from the ground up. Have you ever wondered why it's such a pain to shop for some of the most basic essentials? Because in my experience, whether I'm shopping for a simple t-shirt or a pair of sweatpants, it seemed like I could never find a brand that delivered quality, well-fitting, comfortable clothes. At most, I could get 2 of those, until I found Mack Weldon. They understood that buying underwear, socks, dress shirts, all the things men need is essentially a guessing game, so they remedied that with premium materials, smart design, and consistency. Not only does everything I've ever bought from them fit exactly how I like, but they've put a ton of resources into creating and choosing their own custom fabric that you're not going to find anywhere else. So say you order one of their long sleeve tees and decide you want another a few months later, you don't have to worry about it fitting and feeling completely different like you do with other brands. I mean, just look at the packaging their stuff shows up in. There's not a single part of the Mack Weldon experience that wasn't meticulously thought through. And I really do mean that. They even have a completely free loyalty program called Weldon Blue to reward the folks like me who get hooked on their premium products. To get free shipping for life, you just have to reach level 1, and at level 2 you receive 20% off every order for the next year and plenty of other sweet benefits. If you want to give them a shot, go to mackweldon.com/solo and don't forget to use code SOLO at checkout to get 20% off your first order. Okay, how many dislikes do you think flooded in as soon as I dared give myself a compliment? Probably a lot, so to those who enjoy my content, do me a favor and hit that like button right in the face to help with the ratio, and consider subscribing if you want more mythology content delivered to your sub box every week. And now, without further ado, the messed up mythology of Tartarus. So before we start talking about all the folks being tortured in Tartarus, I should probably tell you a little more about what Tartarus is, because it's not just a place, it's an actual deity. See, according to the Greek creation myth, Tartarus was one of the 3 primordial deities that was born from chaos at the beginning of time, the other 2 being Gaia, the earth, and Eros, love, the driving force behind all creation. That doesn't mean that Tartarus was walking around the universe in a humanoid shape like the Olympians did. He was more of an abstract, elemental deity who's far too complicated for our human brains to understand. The point is, he did have a consciousness of some kind and was even able to mate with Gaia to produce the monstrous Typhon, who we seem to mention every other episode. Now, what's especially interesting is that if you were to ask someone in ancient Greece where Tartarus was located and what kind of place it was, the answer you received would depend on when you were asking. In the early days of the Greek Empire, the universe was envisioned in an egg shape, with the sky forming the upper dome and the pit of Tartarus forming the bottom dome, and the Earth was the flat, horizontal disk that divided the cosmic sphere into 2 halves, the homes of man and gods above and the prison of the Titans below. Writers like Homer describe Tartarus as a cosmic pit below the Earth where the Titans were imprisoned, but it wasn't thought of as a hellish place where the evil were punished until around 5th century BC. Then you have guys like Plato coming in, changing up the whole game. For starters, Tartarus went from being its own realm to a region of the underworld reserved for the especially cruel, and these 3 kings named Radamanthus Rhadamanthus, Aeacus, and Minos became the judges of the dead. If you want the full rundown on these guys, you can watch my episode about them, but the short version is they decided who would go to Elysium, who would go to Hades, and whose soul was so unjust that they'd be sent to Tartarus. The good news is that Tartarus wasn't always an eternal sentence. It definitely could be, but those determined to be curable would get to leave in a year or so after being purified. According to Plato, the uncurables consisted of those who disrespected the gods, like temple robbers and murderers, while involuntary manslaughter and parricide could be forgiven if you truly regretted it for the rest of your life. The Romans had an even more fleshed out vision of Tartarus though. In Book 6 of Virgil's Aeneid, he describes it as an expansive, fiery landscape surrounded by 3 perimeter walls, beyond which flows the flaming river Phlegyas, which players of the Hades game should no doubt recognize. And similar to how the underworld is guarded by the 3-headed Cerberus, Tartarus had its own much less cuddly form of security in the form of a 50-headed Hydra, and there was no way to sneak past it because it sat on top of a gate that screeched whenever it opened. Honestly, this might sound weird, but I really appreciate the little details in Greek mythology like that screeching gate. Like, I can just picture Virgil explaining Tartarus' security system to someone and them saying, but what happens if the Hydra's sleeping and someone sneaks past it? Well, the gate it guards is, super screechy, so it'd wake the Hydra up. Really? A screechy gate? That's how you're gonna fix this plot hole? Listen, it's not like there's an open ventilator shaft that can blow up the entire underworld if someone hits it right. Can we just move on? So as mentioned earlier, Tartarus has always been the prison of the Titans who tried to prevent the Olympians from taking over the ethereal throne, but there are plenty of other residents who've been forced to suffer through what can only be described as cruel and unusual punishment. In total, there are 9 famous figures who've been subjected to the eternal torture of the gods, and in this section we're covering the details of their tribulations and what they did to deserve them. The first one up to bat is King Tantalus, who I feel very comfortable describing as a total asshole. Like the vast majority of Greek figures, he was the son of a sexy mortal woman and Zeus. One day the king's father invites him up to Olympus to dine with the gods, but this bolsters up his ego a bit too much, and after meeting the other deities, Tantalus decides to put them to the test and figure out whether they really are all-knowing or if that's just big talk. Not only does he steal their ambrosia, the sacred food that grants them immortality, and share some of their secrets with the mortals on Earth, but he also chopped up and boiled his own son Pelops and tried feeding him to the Olympians. Fortunately, most of them knew about his creepy little test and held off from eating the main course, but Demeter, who was currently distraught at the disappearance of her daughter Persephone, absent-mindedly ate the boy's left shoulder. As punishment for his transgression, Zeus cast the disgraced king into Tartarus and forced him to stand in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree. And whenever the starving former king would reach for the fruit, the branches would move just out of his grasp, and when he reached for the water, it would recede before he could get any. As a result, Tantalus' name went on to become the proverbial term for temptation without satisfaction, tantalize. Another king who called Tartarus his post-mortem home is Ixion. He committed the first kin-related murder by pushing his new father-in-law onto a bed of burning coals so he didn't have to give him a bridal gift. The royals in the surrounding lands were so horrified by this crime that they refused to perform the rituals that cleansed him of his sins, and Ixion went on to become a social outcast that wasn't welcome in any kingdom except for one. For reasons that aren't totally clear, Zeus went on to feel pity for the kin-murdering maniac and invited him to dine in Olympus, a decision he would go on to regret when Ixion tried feeling up Queen Hera under the dinner table. I know, not a smart move to covet the king of the universe's wife, but Zeus didn't want to punish him until he knew for sure where his allegiances lie. He put Ixion to the test by making a cloud clone of Hera named Nephele and putting her next to him while he was sleeping. Then, when Ixion woke up, he not only made love to her, but got her pregnant. Nephele went on to give birth to Centaurus, a deformed hunchback who lived in the mountains and had sex with horses, which resulted in the birth of the first ever centaur. Meanwhile, Zeus struck Ixion with a thunderbolt and cast him into Tartarus. From that point onward, the disgraced king would be strapped to a wheel of fire that would never stop spinning, a punishment that was said to reflect Ixion's ever-burning passion for the women he doesn't deserve. Yet another king that was personally punished by the powers that be was the infamous Sisyphus. This guy was really a thorn in Zeus's side for a while. Not only did he mercilessly kill guests and travelers to his kingdom, which is a huge violation of the Greek hospitality custom known as xenia, but he also tattled to the river god Aesopus when Zeus was hooking up with his daughter Aegina. At first, Zeus ordered the personification of death, Thanatos, to chain Sisyphus up in Tartarus, but then he managed to trick Thanatos into chaining up himself by asking how his shackles worked. This led to a brief period where there was no death at all, which was unacceptable to the god of war Ares, so he freed Thanatos, captured Sisyphus, and brought him back to Tartarus. The shenanigans aren't over yet though. Sisyphus managed to convince Persephone to allow him to go back to the surface to scold his wife for not burying him properly. Then he refused to return until Hermes dragged him back, kicking and screaming. After this, he was finally trapped in the realm of the damned for good, and Zeus crafted a hyper-specific punishment that would both humiliate and frustrate the king who considered himself so clever. For the rest of eternity, Sisyphus would be forced to roll a large boulder to the top of a steep mountain slope, only for it to always roll back to the bottom whenever he was close to succeeding. But hey, what if I told you that Sisyphus had a brother who was also an egotistical kumquat? Would that surprise you at all, or would the surprising part of that sentence be that I used kumquat as an insult? Now, as a result of their shared delusions of grandeur, Sisyphus and his brother Salmoneus actually hated each other. In fact, their hatred was so deep that Sisyphus consulted with an oracle to see how he could kill his brother without suffering any consequences. Then he followed her advice, which entailed seducing his niece Tyro and getting her pregnant so the child would one day kill Salmoneus. And while that wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing in the world, Tyro wasn't going to betray her own father, so she had no choice but to kill her son soon after he was born. As for King Salmoneus' crime, this is probably one of the worst when it comes to insulting the gods. He ordered his subjects to worship him under the name of Zeus, then built a bridge made of brass and rode his chariot over it at full speed to imitate the sound of thunder. And to complete the illusion, he also dragged cauldrons behind him and threw torches in the air to represent lightning. As you'd expect, Zeus wouldn't tolerate any mere mortal trying to equate themselves to him, so he struck Salmoneus down with a real lightning bolt, which also decimated his kingdom, and then tossed him into Tartarus. Unfortunately, we don't know anything about what his punishment entailed, but we could have some real fun brainstorming ideas. But hey, Tartarus wasn't home to exclusively men. Let's talk about some of their female residents. It is Women's History Month after all. This myth follows the 50 daughters of Danaides, the king of Libya, who apparently had the libido of a rabbit. Danaides also had a brother, the appropriately named Aegyptus, who was the king of Egypt and had 50 sons. At the request of Danaides, Aegyptus sent his 50 sons to protect Libya's civilian population from nearby battles, and in return, Danaides promised each of his daughters hands in marriage, only he started to regret this deal pretty much immediately. So when their wedding night finally came, he ordered his daughters to kill their husbands, and they all did, except for Hypermnestra, who spared her husband Lynceus because he respected her desire to remain a virgin. As a result, 49 of the daughters, referred to as the Danaides, were punished for violating their oath by being condemned to spend eternity carrying water up a hill to a bathtub so they could cleanse their sins. Only the tub had cracks in the bottom that ensured it could never be filled. Like many of Tartarus's other residents, they came to represent the uselessness of a repetitive task that's impossible to complete. Next, we have yet another king, Phlegyas, who is trapped in Tartarus for eternity, but unlike the others, I actually kind of feel bad for this guy. See, his daughter Coronis was pregnant with Apollo's baby, but started to fall for somebody else mid-incubation, and out of jealousy, the sun god either ordered his sister Artemis, goddess of the hunt, to slay his former lover, or he killed her himself with his bow and arrows. Naturally, King Phlegyas was furious about his daughter's quite needless death, and in his rage burned one of Apollo's temples to the ground, a decision that would prove to be most unwise. Not one to let the score stay even though, Apollo slew Phlegyas with his arrows and cursed him to spend the rest of forever in Tartarus. There he was entombed inside a boulder and starved while forced to sit in front of a delicious feast that stood just out of his reach. Call me crazy, but I think Apollo's in the wrong with this one. He does manage to redeem himself with our next entry though. See, after Hera discovered that Zeus was having an affair with Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis, she ordered the giant Tityos to rape her as revenge. Thankfully for Leto, she was able to call on her children before any real damage could be done, and they slew the giant with their arrows before Zeus sent him to Tartarus. As a punishment, the giant's body was bound and stretched while two vultures continuously devoured his liver, which would regenerate every night, and the process would start all over again the next morning. And if you think that punishment sounds familiar, that's because it's extremely similar to what Prometheus had to endure after stealing fire and giving it to mankind. Now our second to last entry is another that seems just a little too harsh and actually involves a deity that I didn't know about until I researched for this episode, Arke, the messenger of the Titans. She was the twin sister of Iris, the messenger of the Olympians and personification of the rainbow, and was often affiliated with the fated second rainbow. Arke's unforgivable sin was siding with the Titans during the Titanomachy, and Zeus punished her by casting her into the deepest pit in Tartarus and ripping off her wings so she could never escape. And a messed up fun fact is her wings went on to be given to Achilles' parents, Phlegyas and Tityos, on their wedding day. Not gonna lie, I'm a little pissed that Lauren and I didn't get anything that cool on our wedding day. What's that about Zeus? Is it cause I make fun of you for being so horny all the time? Anyway, we are finally on to our final entry, and this one might just be my favorite on account of it being so damn hilarious. This guy named Ocnus, who isn't related to anyone that noteworthy, was condemned to weave a rope of straw that would be eaten by a donkey exactly as fast as he could weave it. What makes this funny to me is we have no real idea why he received this punishment. Some experts have theorized it was because he was late for his initiation into the Eleusinian Mysteries, a cult dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, and others suggest it's a result of him being morally weak and unable to make any decisions, which resulted in him avoiding life's obstacles and helping no one but himself. Personally, I just love the fact that he's trapped in what is basically hell and forced to complete a task that some literal jackass keeps getting in the way of. And I also like to imagine that he has no idea why he's down there either. Like maybe Hades' paperwork got all mixed up and he ended up forcing some totally random bystander to spend the entirety of his afterlife being sabotaged by some donkey. Definitely seems like something that Goofy Gods comics could make a strip out of though. Hint, hint, guys. Anyway, that will do it for today's episode on Tartarus and the sad saps who live there. I may have left a few details out, but that's because I plan on dedicating entire videos to the majority of these figures. But now I'm curious, Solo fam, which of these punishments do you think is the worst, and if you had to pick one to endure, which would you choose? Make sure you let me know in a comment down below, and when you're through with that, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Not only does commenting, liking, and subscribing all help the channel grow and rise up in the algorithm, but it also warms my cold, dead heart. For those who want to stay updated on Messed Up Origins news, like when new videos are coming out and what they'll be about, make sure you follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And while you may not be able to follow Cerberus on social media, I do have the next best thing, Gunther. He's my best pal, and while he may not make much of a guard dog, he has plenty of other talents, like farting and burping. I will see you all again next week with yet another episode of Mythology Explained. Until then, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.